In this video today, I'm talking about an old Moves magazine that I have. It's Moves 79, back from 1994. And I've had this a long time, but one of the lead article in it is about strategy and tactics number 163, the 7 years war in Europe from 1756 to 1763. That's a very interesting game, and it was Joe Miranda designed it and was pioneering some mechanics to recognize this. And one of the things that he said in this article that he was doing is trying to model the 18th century operational warfare, such as happened in the 7 Years' War, where the field marshal or the commander had to manage things that a staff today would take care of, like supply, planning a march, and doing his own intelligence and reconnaissance. So Miranda tried to put those concepts at work in here in devising this game. So mostly what this article does is it zeroes in on some of his basically designer notes as to what he was trying to accomplish, but it also includes some optional rules. So there's a very thorough description of the game in here. One of the things I'll comment to that Miranda did in the 7 Years' War in Europe game is he included a diplomatic conflict table where you entered into diplomatic conflict with the other player, and if you won those conflicts, you could maybe gain an ally for yourself out of one of the states that's represented in the game, or you could disrupt the other guy's coalition. So it added a little bit of flavor so that you can't always count on your allies sticking with you. He also included a balance of power table because there really was no dominant empire that was in so much control during this period. So it really needed a balance between the existing states. So the way that balance of power is affected is partly through perception. So if you win a battle, you end up moving the balance of power in your favor. And of course, that can affect your diplomatic points. So when you're doing diplomatic conflict later, if you're winning the balance of power, you may have, more clout. The problem, though, is that if you get too much power and the balance is shifted too far in an extreme direction, the game ends because of the chaos and whatever, the disruption of Europe happening because of that. So, which gives a natural, governor to the throttle if you are Frederick, for example, trying to conquer a number of fortifications. You're going to limit your success so that you don't make enemies. In this game, each turn is a season, but you can choose to really extend yourself in those seasons. So because there's an impulse system. So the first impulse is pretty much penalty free, but if you decide to go on to a second impulse to move again and to engage in more combat, you do so at penalty. So you'll take more attrition, you'll have less success probably, unless you really have overwhelming numbers. And the same thing would go, there's even more penalties if you go into a third impulse. But if you are in the right situation, you do, have those opportunities. So that was a neat innovation that he put into this game. There's a wide array of units in this game, so that adds a lot of flavor. There's line infantry, cavalry, light troops, pioneers, legions, artillery, supply trains, leaders, brigades, and regiment sizes. So these units basically have a strength based on their size, and but they also have a discipline class. So Miranda introduced the idea of various classes of discipline that are used in this game. So the highest discipline is guard, and then veteran, then line, and then the lowest discipline is rabble. So when you have to make a discipline check during combat, obviously your guards and your veterans do much better at maintaining order, whereas your rabble may fail or even desert. So this gives you some pause in just having a lot of strength. If they're all made up of rabble, things may not work out as well as you had hoped in the battle. But when you do combat, sometimes you are checking for a morale result, and that's when you use these. Also, when you are rallying, trying to rally demoralized units, you use their morale rating. So obviously the better units, the higher classed units will rally quicker. Also, the leaders in this game have two values: a strategic value, which is primarily for movement, because movement is not automatic. So if you have a good leader with a high rating, he's almost guaranteed to march his force to where he wants to. They also have a tactical skill rating, which is used to modify combat, but also to modify the discipline table results as well as rally results. So the leaders are brought into the game and add a lot of flavor. And of course, they are named leaders, but there's some generic field marshal ones as well. As I already mentioned, there's a march table. March is not guaranteed, so you can have a good plan, but it helps if you have a leader like Frederick with his force, and he's more likely to have a successful march. But sometimes you get no march, sometimes you get a march, but you take attrition. Sometimes you get a forced march where you can move a lot farther than you had expected. The game also includes engineers. I believe they're called pioneers in this game at this time, and they can affect movement by giving you a bonus on the march table. One of the ideas behind this, maybe they can build a bridge over a river if you have them with you, so the river won't really slow you down when it normally would. They can build field fortifications to help you to be defensive if you're caught out in the field by an enemy army, or they can be used as pioneers or sappers to, if you're besieging a fortress. So it's a nice little detail added in, even though they don't have a lot of strength, they bring their modifications, their skill level comes in. The game also has supply trains that travel with the army and can be expended to maintain the army. Of course, if you don't have one with you, you can forage, but the bigger the army, the harder it is to sustain in forage, and depending on what kind of terrain you're in, you may not be successful. The game also has a historical events table. So there are lots of different events covered in this. It's an 11 to 66 table. And these sometimes include events that happen outside of Europe, like the Ottomans maybe attacking Russia, or things going on between France and Britain in the New World, in the colonies, as part of the French and Indian War. There are a number of things that can happen on this events table, so it adds a lot of flavor. And one other thing that this article zeroes in on, it has a sidebar of optional rules. And so one of the optional rules is the tactical zone rules. So, you can have a zone of control that has limited effect at this scale if you want to use all of these tactical rules, and they'll add a lot more detail to the game. I personally did not play the game with those rules. There's also a flavor rule called national characteristics. So this brings some asymmetry to the different states in the game. For example, Prussia has a characteristic called Prussian centralization. The French have one called Elan. The Russians have one called stolidity. The Austrians have special abilities because of their light troops doctrine, and the British have a discipline characteristic. So these affect the game in different ways depending on which nationality. So it does bring some asymmetry, but it's not so overshadowing that it really changes the game that much. It just adds a lot of flavor. So if you enjoy the 7 Years' War in Europe, 1756 through 1763, from S&T number 163, Moves 79 is an issue you might want to have for all of these great designer notes from Joe Miranda. Anyway, stay tuned if you'd like to see other looks at some of my magazine collection in the future. And until then, I hope you have a great day.